Is Jerome Lovato. I'm an elections consultant, and today I will be presenting on the state of election security training for DEF CON 30 Voting Village. So a little bit about me. I have over 15 years of experience in election technology, administration, and policy. As I mentioned, I am currently an election consultant. I have a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from University of Colorado at Denver. Now I'm currently enrolled in the Master of Science in Cybersecurity program at Georgia Tech. I was formerly employed for elections at the Colorado Secretary of State's office as a voting system specialist, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. I was formerly their Director of Voting System Testing and Certification, and was formerly the Director of MITRE's National Election Security Lab. So the goals of this presentation are to highlight the various ways that states address election security training, both from a policy and practical perspective, and then also engage with you all, the DEF-CON-ites, and challenge you to work with your state and local election officials to improve election security policies and practices. As we go through this presentation, we'll highlight what I, in my opinion, are good things and, of course, bad things, and kind of stress areas of improvement. So we'll go ahead and get started. So what this is and is not. This is my perspective. This is not endorsed or sponsored by any institution. Hopefully it's informative, and it's definitely not state bashing, and really showcasing an area of need. It is not intended to be alarmist. I really don't want this to be viewed as something that is, the world is burning down. But I think that this is an area of need, and I think it's important to showcase this part of the election space and where you all can be helpful in making it better. So just some highlights in general. I think it's important to, when we're talking in elections, to be on the same page when it comes to lingo. So in the different policies that I researched, and just in my experience with working in elections, one word can mean different things, or there can be the same function but have different words. When it comes to election worker, poll worker, election officer, poll manager, and other terms, they all generally mean the same thing. And there is a distinction between, a poll worker and a local election official. The local election official is usually an elected or appointed position. So county board of elections, county clerk and recorder, the town clerk, general registrar, registrar of voters. Those are different terms that are used for local election official, and just want to draw that distinction there. And so if I say election worker or poll worker, I'm referring to temporary staff that are employed for just an election cycle, and not full-time staff at a county office. And so there's different training timelines. So for local election officials, most regulatory documentation has a requirement that local election officials receive training once per year or once every 2 years, or have continuing education. And for election workers, that also varies. And the closest timeline I saw was that it's some states give an allowance of being able to train election workers up to 4 days before an election, and others, and on the other end is within 12 months of an election. From my experience, most election worker training happens 30 days or so before an election, but there is a lot of variance in that whole timeline for when training occurs or is required. The average training time for election workers is about 4 hours. I saw some training that was like an hour and a half, and others up to 16 hours or so. But on average, it's about 4 hours for election workers. For local election officials, that too varies, but there are some states that have full-blown certification programs where either the state's chief election official has a curriculum and plan established for certifying local election officials, or there's a partnership with a university to assist with having a election certification program, election official certification program. And so for election workers, it's about 4 hours or so for preparing for elections. Different training methods. You have pre-recorded videos, printed material, video conferences, or in person, or hybrid of kind of all of the above. But there are different training methods for training, staff on conducting elections. Also, in general, I kind of alluded to this, but the states provide training to local election officials, and then the local election officials are responsible for training election workers, is typically how it's done. And last, and I think important to highlight, is that during general election cycles, which are the even years, there are millions of election workers employed. The largest temp staff workforce, where it's the levels of experience greatly varies. You have people who've been working in elections for decades, to people who are just getting interested, or people who just want to work for a short amount of time. So a lot of diversity in this workforce, which I think is important to keep in the back of our minds when it comes to training and what that could look like, especially on the security front. So, good highlights. Some states were really great at providing accessible material, whether it be links to a whole hub of modules, or easy to find, easy to read or watch videos, or read material. So accessible. Some states were great at providing clear guidance on what was expected, or what is expected during the election cycle, and their duties and responsibilities. Other states made good use, in my opinion, of short videos that really just got to the point of an election worker's responsibilities. And other states were good at listing current courses that are available for on-demand training, which I thought was really nice to see that states have taken that proactive approach to ensure that there is quality training available, especially for people who have full-time jobs and have dedicated a day to working at a pole or a couple of days. The topics generally just um, found in the material, the duties, responsibilities of election workers, the layout of a polling place. Some guides had drawings, others really just descriptive text of what the layout should look like. Physically securing ballots and equipment is broadly discussed, and even how to use voting systems, electronic poll books, whatever technology is used at a polling location or even a central counting facility. So there's lots of other good things, but I just kind of wanted to highlight just a handful of both the good and the bad, just to give you a general feel of what I observed in my research on this topic. Some of the bad highlights: inaccessible training material. Some materials just completely buried or really hard to find on the state's website, and so that was pretty frustrating, especially compared to other states where you do a Google search of insert state here, election training, and it goes right to a website that has all that you're looking for. So inaccessible training material, really frustrating. Lack of uniformity in the jurisdiction level training. So as I mentioned, state election officials usually have some level, some format for training local election officials. After that layer, most states just kind of pass the buck to local election officials to conduct training, and not a lot of guidance on how they should do that, the amount of time, and or even topics. So there's a lot of inconsistencies at the jurisdiction level when it comes to quality of training. I think that's something to keep in mind as we look at how we can improve elections and the security of our elections. Some states are statutorily required to establish curriculum or a program for training, and it was that curriculum was either non-existent or publicly unavailable. But yet another frustrating point there. I think it's important to understand, how our election workers are being trained, to provide at least some level of accountability. If they just kind of don't know, then it could be the fault of they weren't trained, or that they just really just kind of brushed off the training. Another thing that I saw lacking was lack of oversight to measure the success of election worker training. I was really looking for how do states measure the effectiveness of training, and some states do have an inspection or audit program, but most really don't look at how county or how the local election officials, the effectiveness of their training to election workers, and even at the state level, and the way states measure effectiveness of their training to local election officials. So that's something that I thought was worth highlighting. And then finally, topics that were rarely covered: physical safety of election workers, um, and cybersecurity. Those two especially were just uh, uh, glaringly missing from uh, election election training, especially on the security side, safety and security side, uh, of what are the things that election workers should be looking out for when it comes to physical safety and cybersecurity. I think that's really critical, and definitely an area of improvement. Uh, Speaking of areas of improvement, uh, top three things for me that I think should happen. One, easy to find training material. Uh, I think this is I put this at the top of the list because I think it's the uh, easiest lift for states is to make this information public and easy to find, so that uh, not only election workers can find it, but even the general public, people who are just generally interested in uh, elections and ensuring that our elections are as secure as they can be, and then also having more state and jurisdiction relevant material and references. Uh, I saw several documents that referenced the Election Assistance Commission or CISA, and really uh, with those references, you're asking an election worker or local election official, or even really a state election official, to drink from a fire hose. Both references, EAC and CISA, really great information on election security and best practices, but also a lot of information, and hard to digest if that's your only reference. Is go look at CISA's election security initiative and all the material there. Like I said, great material, but really harder to digest, especially for election workers and the small amount of time they have for actual training. And then finally, uh, one that I think would be really beneficial is more hands-on training with equipment that election workers are responsible for. I saw several videos where they're walking through. Um, this is how you seal equipment. This is how you plug it in, turn it on, and so forth. Um, but in my experience with investigating complaints, when I worked for the state of Colorado and in election observation over the years, uh, uh, there are times when even kind of the simple things like plugging in a device or how to enter a password and setting up an electronic voting device uh, could, has been challenging in responding to complaints of people not having access to accessible voting equipment. Um, that those are things where really just even an hour of hands-on experience of this is how you do it, I think would go a long way. But these are my top three, in my opinion, areas of improvement. I know opinions will vary there, but I think it was important to highlight there. And so the challenge, and I have two here. One is work with state and local election officials to develop and improve election security policies and practices. And I emphasize the word with here because I think it's important that that is what happens, and that it's not uh, in that our in our engagement with our state and local election officials, we're not viewed as antagonists, but as people willing to help and ready to help improve in this area. And with the vast experience of you all in this community, I think that can go a long way in really improving our elections. And then the second one, which I think is probably the hardest one, which is the fit quality security training, both physical and cyber, within the tight time constraints. Um, it could be that a local election official really only does have an hour and a half or 2 hours to conduct election worker training, and how do you fit in all of the duties, responsibilities, highlights of laws and whatnot, and then also physical and cybersecurity in there. So how can we provide that level of support where these are uh, the critical things to look at it in the security front? And it's not at all, I'm not at all trying to be dismissive of uh, all of security, but tight timelines is a real constraint. Local election officials don't have unlimited time or even a week to do this training. There are true time and budget constraints and resource constraints when it comes to training uh, local election workers, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. But I think that um, there are ways to really make this more effective. And uh, uh, when it comes to improving, one thing we're all really good at as a society is improving. We went from a wagon wheel to flying on airplanes, and it didn't happen overnight. It was a progression. It was information sharing, building on institutional knowledge, working with one another, engaging stakeholders, listening to opposing views, really, and the diversity when it comes to making progress. And in elections, it is a diverse workforce where you have people like me, trained engineers working in this space, to people who uh, were farmers before working in elections, and kind of everyone all over the map who work in this space. But it, it is an area where we can constantly improve, and I think the key message here is just working together to do it. Understanding we're going to have differences of opinions, and this a lot of people are really passionate about elections, but with the goal of always working together and improving the state of our elections in the United States. And finally, just some references. In this presentation, the PowerPoint presentation, uh, the, the links I have associated with every state, it um, links to either a training guide or statute or rule or directive that links to election training for each state in Washington D.C. And not this isn't an exhaustive list of references, but I did reference at least one document from every state to as part of this presentation that hopefully gives you a launching pad and a place to start looking and digging and seeing how it can be improved. The link on my website here will take you to an interactive map where you click on each state and it'll take you to a link regarding election security training for that state. And my contact information, my email, LinkedIn. Always glad to talk about elections, election administration, election technology, policy, my experience in this field. So definitely feel free to contact me, and really appreciate the opportunity to present on this topic. Uh, I love working in this space, and really glad to be able to do this. Hope you all have a great morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you happen to be watching this.